What should we discuss today? Dying, death, rebirth, kamma. Usually kamma is very interesting, isn't it? Because kamma is our future. Or as the Buddha sometimes says, you're the owner of your kamma, heir to your kamma, born of your kamma, related to your own kamma, and you abide supported by your own kamma. Whatever kamma we shall do, wholesome or unwholesome, of that I will be the heir. So this is your true property. If you want to regard anything as your property, then it's your kamma. But then sometimes when we look around in the world, we also notice, interesting. Some fellows, they seem to live a bit of a crooked life, the way they do things, or maybe not completely honest, but everything going well for them, or not severe consequences happening to them. Other people doing just a little mistake, everything falls apart. Seems not quite fair. What is going on there? If the law of kamma is working, how can it be so unfair? Or at least it looks unfair on first glance. And this was an ancient dilemma already they recognized at the Buddha's time, that sometimes it's hard to understand why one person doing a wholesome deed and then, it gets great rewards and recognition and praise. The other one doing the same good deed, nobody cares. Nobody notices even. How come? Actually, the Buddha gives the answer in the sutta in Anguttara Nikaya, Anguttara 3.100. It's called the Lona Kapalda Sutta, the lump of salt simile. Probably you've heard it simile, but the sutta has actually much more about that. So I would say let's look at it together, and that addresses exactly that question. How come it seems that some people get away with certain wrongdoings, others don't? What's the reason for that? Let's have a look. The Buddha addresses the monks here, but then of course when we read the suttas, we also understand many of the teachings don't apply only to the monastics, monks and nuns. The same principle applies also to lay devotees or anyone often in the world. But since normally the monks were around, so the Buddha addresses the monks. Because if one were to say thus, a person experiences kamma in precisely the same way that he created it, if that were the case, you will experience the kamma or the result of your deeds, of your actions, exactly the same way as you have done it. You have killed somebody, you will be killed. You've helped somebody, you will be helped. If that were the case, exactly the same 101, in such a case, there would be no living the spiritual life and no opportunity would be seen for completely making an end of suffering. Why not? Well, the whole day we do things, right? We say things, we act, we speak. That is all kamma, even mental actions. If every action has to come back at some point in the future, the same way we did it just now, how can you ever be liberated? If every action needs to produce a result first in exactly the same way, so today you open the door for somebody, then next moment you attain Nibbana. But then now you cannot enter Parinibbana because somebody has to open the door for you first. You see what I mean? Or you've done something unwholesome today, maybe you shout at someone on the traffic, why they don't drive faster, or why like this, or they cut you off, or take your parking lot. Then you get angry. Then, at some point, maybe through your practice, you develop, but you can still not attain Nibbana or Parinibbana, because the kamma supposedly would have to come back in exactly the same way. You cannot get out of samsara before you are not getting angry and getting the fruit of your anger from last time. So if kamma would be exactly 101, there would be no way of getting liberated. Because it would be an endless game forever. Nobody can get out of samsara. That's what the Buddha is trying to say. There would be no making an end of suffering. But if one were to say thus, when a person creates kamma that is to be experienced in a particular way, he experiences its result precisely in that way. In such a way, the living of the spiritual life is possible, and an opportunity is seen for completely making an end of suffering. So it's a bit vague, but I understand it to mean You create a kamma, but the result can be in a certain particular way, but it doesn't have to be exactly in the same way as you did it. So maybe we know the story of the Buddha in a past life. It's not from the suttas, but from the, I think, Jatakas. In a past life, he was a wrestler, supposedly, a fighter, the Buddha, a bodhisattva, before he became awakened. And then he had the habit of breaking his opponent's back. So that, of course, is very unwholesome karma, right? Then, many lifetimes later, even now in his last life, where he became a Buddha, he would often suffer from back pain. Okay, back pain, I mean, not nice, but also not so bad, right? Because he was breaking people's back. Nobody came and broke his back. So as a karmic result, yes, there is some result, but it's diluted, it's very small in comparison to what he did, isn't it? A bit of back pain is quite okay compared to your back being broken. Or let's say Angulimala, the mass murderer who killed so many people and then was wearing their fingers around his neck as a garland. So that is very unwholesome. But then he became an arahant, and what happened to him during alms round from time to time, when he goes down the street, people would throw things out the window, and they would land on him. Sometimes he would get injured, or people would scold him when he goes on alms round. Yeah, okay, it's unpleasant, it's the result of his past deeds, but it's nothing in comparison to being killed, right? What he has done is way more severe. Killing 900 plus people is more severe than getting a bit injured occasionally on alms round. So we can see the kamma and the fruit, the result, can be a bit different in severity. There will be some result, but the severity does not have to be exactly the same as you did it. And this is what might look a bit unfair at first. And how is it possible even that it gets diluted in this way? Buddha explains, here because some person has created trifling, a very small, bad karma, yet it leads him to hell, to a very unpleasant existence. While some other person has created exactly the same trifling little bit of bad karma, yet it is to be experienced in this very life, without even a slight residue being seen, much less abundant residue. So only in this life he gets some results from his unwholesome karma and nothing afterwards. And the other person has to go to hell for the same thing. What kind of person creates trifling bad karma that leads him to hell? Here some person is undeveloped in body, virtuous behavior, mind and wisdom. He is not developed in body, virtue, mind and wisdom. When we hear in the suttas body, undeveloped in body, or developed in body, it doesn't mean he's a bodybuilder. Body here stands for sense restraint, the bodily senses. So undeveloped in body means he does not practice sense restraint. Does not restrain the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and the body and mind. So he doesn't practice sense restraint, doesn't keep the precepts, doesn't practice virtue, lacks wisdom, and he is limited and has a mean character, and he dwells in suffering. So, okay, that's the first type of person. When such a person creates trifling bad karma, it leads him to hell or to a bad existence. So his character in general is like this, undeveloped in virtue, spiritual qualities you can say, virtue, sense restraint, wisdom, mind. Mind stands for concentration. So he lacks spiritual qualities. So that's why even a little bit of unwholesome karma already has a severe impact. But then what kind of person creates exactly the same trifling bad karma, and yet it is to be experienced in this very life, without even a slight residue being seen, much less abundant residue? So what kind of person is that? Who's doing the same thing, yet he seems to get away with it. Just some small result in the present life. Here some person is developed in body, meaning in sense restraint. He's developed in virtuous behavior, mind, meaning concentration, and wisdom. He's unlimited and has a lofty character, and he dwells without measure. The measureless state usually refers to the Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, compassion, and so on. So the spiritual qualities are highly developed in that person. When such a person creates exactly the same bad kamma, it is to be experienced in this very life, without even a slight residue being seen, much less abundant residue. So this is the difference that prevents, to some degree, the severity of the kamma to produce the same severe bad results on account of all the good qualities he has in addition to that. So the same unwholesome kamma does not produce the same severity of uncomfortable or painful results in this case. The Buddha gives a simile, and the simile is quite nice. Suppose a man would drop a lump of salt into a small bowl of water. What do you think, bhikkhus? Would that lump of salt make the small quantity of water in the bowl salty and undrinkable? Yes, Bhante, the monks say. For what reason? Because the water in the bowl is limited, just a small amount. Thus, the lump of salt would make it salty and undrinkable. It's a very small quantity of water and then a big lump of salt. But suppose a man would drop a lump of salt, the same amount, into the river Ganges. What do you think, bhikkhus? Would that lump of salt make the river Ganges become salty and undrinkable? No, Bhante. For what reason? Because the river Ganges contains a large volume of water. Thus, that lump of salt would not make it salty and undrinkable. It's quite clear. So too, because some person here has created trifling bad karma, yet it leads him to hell. It's like making it salty, your life. While some other person creates exactly the same trifling karma, yet it is to be experienced in this very life, with some very minor results, without even any residue in a future existence. So what kind of person creates trifling bad karma that leads him to hell? Here some person is undeveloped in body, virtuous behavior, mind and wisdom. What kind of person creates the same karma is to be experienced in this life. Some person is developed in body, virtuous behavior, mind and wisdom. So interesting, huh? This lump of salt simile is actually quite well known, but it's often misunderstood. Most often when you listen, when we use in our Dhamma circles, teachers also sometimes might say, okay, you've done some bad karma in the past. Can happen. So if you want to reduce the impact, just do a lot of good karma. And then the mixture will be okay. It's like you put some salt, then also put some sugar, and then it will not be so salty. It's a different simile, but what the Buddha meant, he didn't say do a lot of wholesome deeds. It's not quite the same. He speaks about the development of spiritual qualities. It's a bit more than just generosity. Virtue, concentration, wisdom, sense restraint. That goes actually quite a level higher than just ordinary wholesomeness. So let us also remember that this simile was originally meant more as an encouragement to practice spiritual qualities. Now, I'm not saying that doing wholesome will not also benefit. Of course it does. And I do agree that actually the simile is probably still correct. By adding a lot of wholesome karma, you also dilute, or you make it a bit more sweet rather than salty. But the way the simile was originally used was not so much about just adding a lot of wholesome karma, but it was about developing your virtue, developing mindfulness and concentration, wisdom. These are the qualities that the Buddha speaks about that reduce the severity of the impact of that kamma. So then he gives another simile. Here, because someone is imprisoned for stealing half a kahapana or a kahapana a small amount of money. That was the currency back in the days. Or 100 kahapanas. While someone else is not imprisoned for stealing the same amount of money. Again, this looks very unfair, right? Two people are stealing the same amount of money. One person is imprisoned, the other one is not. What kind of person is imprisoned for stealing half a kahapana or so, and so on? Here, someone is poor, with little property and wealth. Such a person is imprisoned for stealing half a kahapana or 100 kahapanas. What kind of person is not imprisoned for stealing half a kahapana or 100 kahapanas? Here someone is rich, with much money and wealth. Such a person is not imprisoned for stealing half a kahapana or 100 kahapanas. So it's like modern analogy. So if you're abundant in spiritual qualities, in this case, abundant in wealth or good fortune, you get away with things. It seems easier. I think Malaysian politics can be a good example, or anywhere politics, not just in Malaysia, where if you go and just don't do your tax report accurately, or they will step on your toes, and then if you're a big minister, or even prime minister in the worst case, you get away with embezzlement of millions. No problem, huh? So, there are differences. So the Buddha uses that. He doesn't say, I agree. He doesn't say it's good, it's right. He just gives an example of how things work in the world, what happens. It's the same back in ancient time. If you think, nowadays our governments are corrupt and so on, even in the past you can see the same thing happens. Rich person get away with certain things. The same person is done by another person, will get him into trouble. What kind of person? Then, of course, it's the same simile as before. Bhikkhus, take the case of a sheep merchant or a butcher who can execute, imprison, fine, or otherwise penalize someone who has stolen one of his sheep, right? But he cannot do so with someone else who has stolen his sheep. What kind of person can this butcher or merchant penalize or imprison or fine for stealing a sheep from him? One who is poor with little property and wealth. The sheep merchant or butcher can execute or imprison, fine, or otherwise penalize such a person for stealing a sheep. But then what kind of person can he not do the same things with? One who is rich, with a lot of money and wealth, a king or royal minister. Yeah, you cannot just imprison the king just because he has taken a sheep from you. So that's the difference. So again, it's the abundance. The person with abundance, like the big vessel, like the Ganges River, full of spiritual qualities, would still experience some results, but just a small, trifling result for the same karma. And then at the end, the Buddha concludes, if bhikkhus, one were to say thus, a person experiences kamma in precisely the same way that he created it, in such a case, there could be no living of the spiritual life and no opportunity would be seen for completely making an end of suffering. We discussed that before. But if one were to say thus, when a person creates kamma that is to be experienced in a particular way, he experiences the result precisely in that way. In such a case, the living of the spiritual life is possible and an opportunity is seen for completely making an end of suffering. So otherwise, if you practice the Dhamma, you develop spiritual qualities, but if you have to experience all the past karma in exactly the same way you did it, there would be no liberation ever. Right? Every time you do something wholesome, it still has to come back in the same way. How can this ever end? It's like a video game, and there is no game over. It just keeps going on, going on, going on. But if the karma can be experienced in a diminished result, in a diluted way, you can say, like the lump of salt, diluted, then liberation is possible. So, takeaways. What do we learn from this sutta? You get away with corruption if you're rich enough. That's maybe not the key message here. But yeah, I think it is an encouragement for developing good qualities, wholesome qualities. You make yourself like a big vessel, like a big container of goodness, of wholesomeness, of good kamma, of course, also included, spiritual qualities especially. And in this way, we don't have to worry so much about what we have done in the past. Yes, everybody makes mistakes. I'm sure if you think back, there have been moments in your life that nowadays you would act differently, speak differently. We have not chosen the right way, the right action, but we have some regret about. But then, okay, we cannot just delete the past kamma. You know, on the computer keyboard there's a delete button. There's no delete button for kamma. We cannot delete it, but we can dilute it. The computer, does it have a dilute button? No dilute button, but it's like that. You can dilute it by developing spiritual qualities, virtue, wisdom, concentration. And in this way, the severity of that past deed can be trifling, can be minute, barely recognizable. You might have done something very severe in the past, but because of your vastness of spiritual qualities, now you have a little bit of back pain, or the small toe is a little bit painful. That's nothing in comparison. Again, there's still a result. The kamma is not deleted, it's there. It produces a result, but quite small in comparison. So this is a great opportunity, a great relief, I would say, because it means I don't need to worry too much about what I've done in the past. Let me now be a good person, develop the mind, sense restraint, wisdom, compassion, loving kindness, generosity. That's all included, of course. Then we don't need to worry. It's like you add a lot of water into your container, then the same amount of salt does not give a severe effect. If you add gallons, many liters of water to the same lump of salt, it's still the same lump of salt there. Same in the Ganges River, but it doesn't become salty for that reason. So it's a very important simile, a good reminder. Let me develop qualities, good qualities. I don't need to worry about the things that I may have done. Or maybe even now, still occasionally, you do something that is not wholesome. Okay, sure, it can happen. If you're not an arahant, it's to be expected. But then we also do good kamma, right? Generosity, learning, you're coming places like this. You undertake the precepts, giving dana, listening to the Dhamma, practicing mindfulness, developing wisdom. All these things dilute the effects of the past kamma. No worries, you know. If there's a little bit of salt in the Ganges River, so what? Yeah, we try not to put it in, but once it's there, okay, it's fine. Let me be diligent in wholesome activities. Okay. Any comments or questions on this theme? Yeah.
Yesterday I was listening to Bante's Q&A session with the camp participants, the recent one. I listened again. So there's this question that one of the participants asked regarding whether monks get punished if he falls down since he's supposed to be mindful. So in Bante's answer to that question, there was one part Bante mentioned. If someone says something that we don't like, we can protect ourselves, but we also have to forgive at some point. Bante, can you elaborate on we can protect ourselves, but we also have to forgive at some point? What does Bante mean by that?
So actually it has not much to do anymore with the original example of the question the person asking, what happens if a monk stumbles on alms round? The youth, you remember we had this group of youths coming, joining the monks on alms round in the morning. It's quite a long hike from SPS. They were walking together, these 40 children or youth coming along. And they were quite exhausted, especially after walking back afterwards. So anyway, they were worried, what if a monk were to fall or stumble on alms round? Because monks are supposed to be very mindful. So then, will he be punished? That was their question. Will we inflict some punishment on the person if he stumbles or is not mindful? Of course we don't. Because often already, you stumble, maybe even you injure yourself. I think that's punishment enough. Or everyone seeing you stumble, that kind of paise. So that is punishment enough in its own right. No need to add further insult to injury. So basically, you just learn your lesson. Oh yeah, I have to be more careful, more mindful, and then try to do better next time. So actually, punishment is not found in our Buddhist discipline. Even when monks commit severe offenses, even very heavy offenses, even there's no punishment in that sense. We don't have that concept, really. There are consequences. You need to confess your offense. You have to make it open to another monk, and then you pledge not to do it again in the future. But that is usually the consequence of that. Maybe for the second most severe offense classes, the Sanghadisesa offenses, there is a bit more. Maybe it's not a punishment either, but there's a different principle. When the monk has committed an offense, like let's say he was committing a very flirtatious speech with a woman, for example, speaking about their private parts, having that kind of very inappropriate conversation related to sexuality and things like that. So if a monk would have committed that, then it's not enough just to confess that to one monk. He has to make it open to the whole community of monks where he lives. He has to inform every monk, and for minimum 1 week, he loses his rights of seniority. Nobody is allowed to pay respect to him. Even if he's the most senior monk or 20 vasa, even the newly ordained ones are not supposed to pay respect to him. And so this is kind of a disciplinary action, you can say, where a sense of humiliation, well, not humiliation, but really to show him that it's a severe thing that he has done and not to do this again. So he loses some of his seniority privileges on that account temporarily. Later, if he mends his ways, he's reinstated to his former state, and then things continue. Or even another offense also, it's quite the same class of offenses for monastics, for masturbation. It's also the same thing. You know, if a monk or a nun were to masturbate, during that period afterwards, any visiting monk or anyone in the monastery, he has to inform, I masturbated, Even a visiting person coming in, not lay person, but any monk from another monastery just visiting for a few hours, he has to catch them and tell them, by the way, I'm a person who has masturbated. So yeah, you can imagine how shameful, how embarrassing this is. Again, I wouldn't say it's a punishment. It's a way of making the person understand, don't do this in the future, it's not right. And so to shake him up a little bit. And hopefully in the future will not do the same thing. And every day during these 6 days, he has to inform every monk of what he did. So it's also troublesome for the rest of the community. We have to come together because of this person. So it puts a bit of extra pressure on him. But it's not a punishment either. So then coming back to the case that they asked, so if somebody verbally abuses you or accuses you of things that you didn't do, or is even physically violent, it doesn't mean, I'm a Buddhist, I will not say anything back in return. People can do with me whatever they want. This is not the meaning. So you can protect yourself. You can set boundaries. I would say you should. It's quite important. So you could say, no, I didn't do this. Or you could say, no, don't talk with me like that. Or if you want to talk with me like that, go my own way. We can discuss later. So clearly you can protect yourself from that. Or you can get another person to join the conversation if a person is dangerous or violent, physically or verbally. Doesn't mean you have to put up with all of that. So in that sense, you can protect yourself. Or maybe in severe cases, maybe we don't meet anymore. Then I don't want to be around that person. And that is all okay. There is no Dhamma principle that says you have to be the victim of other people's bad moods and have to endure whatever happens to you in all circumstances. Endurance means not getting angry. This is the most important part. So anger does not help anything. So if you can try to protect yourself from that situation, then that's justifiable nonetheless. Anger doesn't help much to solve the situation. But it doesn't mean that we just endure forever and don't change anything, and tomorrow the same is going to happen, the day after tomorrow the same. So yeah, sure, we can set boundaries. or give people a warning, next time you do the same thing, there will be consequences. It can be with children, can be with friends, can be with a spouse, depends on the person, can be even on the workplace. Setting boundaries and then living with that. And then, of course, when people have said or done something, how do we deal with that? Of course, first we try to speak with them and try to make them understand. Maybe they do appreciate, or maybe they do recognize, oh yeah, okay, I see, I made a mistake. That is one possibility. Maybe they don't. Maybe they don't acknowledge their fault. Maybe they never see their wrongdoing. Can also happen, right? So then you try to change or rectify the situation, it didn't work. Now you have two options. Either for the rest of your life you harbor resentment and anger and bitterness towards that person. Actually, who will suffer? Who will suffer by having a lot of resentment, anger and bitterness? He or you? Ourselves, right? The other person sometimes doesn't even know. Might have long forgotten about the incident already. In our heart there's still this salty feeling. So this is the first option. Or option B, we forgive the person. We forgive, we understand, okay, well, that's his own or her own conditioning. That's why he spoke or chose to do like this or like that. Maybe due to her own childhood experience, or maybe some problems in her own family. That's why she is a bit rude today, or whatever it is. And then we forgive that person. Yeah, probably you're not an arahant. So it is to be expected that people are not always perfectly kind and perfectly full of compassion and loving kindness. So we give people the right also to have faults and mistakes, defilements. Like most of us, I guess also, right? So we should expect from time to time that people will misjudge or mistreat or be impolite. That's normal part of life. If you expect that should never happen, it's not realistic, right? That expectation, never this should happen again to me. Who says so? Being born in the world as a human being, you are entitled to a fair degree of suffering. Also to happiness, of course. But nobody lives in this world without, from time to time, being misjudged, or being mistreated, or being spoken to impolitely. So yeah, that's part of life. So yeah, you're entitled to that. And of course we deal with it as good as we can. Politely, mindfully, with understanding, with wisdom, with forgiveness. Because as I said earlier, by not forgiving, by holding a grudge, by being resentful, we are the ones who suffer the most. You're not doing anyone a favor. There's another sutta where the Buddha says, when you suffer, it's not good for you, and also your friends, family, none of them like to be around you, none of them like to see you suffering, right? Nobody wants to see each other suffering. But actually there is one type of people who like to see you suffering. Your enemies. If you have enemies, they would be happy to see you suffering. So by being resentful and having grudges, it doesn't benefit anyone except your enemies. So if you want to do your enemy a favor, take everything very personal and get really angry and resentful. That's what your enemies like to see. But it's not good for you. Not your family will not enjoy that either. Your real friends won't. So nobody benefits from that. So then why? So forgiveness is a very good remedy for letting go of that. It doesn't mean we agree with the person. Some people think, if I forgive him, then he gets away with it. No. The law of kamma, remember the lump of salt, the law of kamma will remember. Even a trifling bad action done by a bad person, he will get his results. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, it's a very fair system. So we don't have to help the law of karma do its job. It's doing its job already. You don't have to teach that person a lesson either. The law of karma will find its way to give him a fair and just result, what we call vipaka, the fruit of his or her actions. We keep our mind wholesome, We can protect ourselves, prevent getting the same situation next time, if you want, or set a clear boundary, but then we move on with our life. No need to harbor resentment. And forgiveness is a very helpful tool for letting go. Forgive and forget, as Pandeyakajita usually says. Yeah, I think that's what I meant during that exposition.